Hello and welcome to our newest episode of The Spin. My name is GC Belchamber and I'm joined today by Jack Shields, the guitarist for Richy Mitch and the Coal Miners and the founder of Jack Shields and the Mojave Rush, who released their sophomore effort this year in the raw, grungy alternative rock ventures of Avalanche Hour. Jack joins us today for discussion of the albums and artists, including Jimi Hendrix, Fleet Foxes, and Ween, that have shaped his unique and uncompromising ear over his years as a songwriter. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. So you said that the first album you remember hearing was Foo Fighters' self-titled, which you heard in the womb.
I did say that.
Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. So before we get into the specific albums, just tell me about your earliest musical memories and your earliest musical experiences.
Well, I don't really remember hearing it in the womb. I can't claim that, but my parents did always say that when I was in the womb that my dad was listening to that first Foo Fighters record a lot, and I would kick whenever it was on. It would really, I guess I would hurt my mom. I'd be kicking so hard in there whenever he played Foo Fighters. So clearly, I was born to rock in some.
Do you think that means you liked it or you didn't like it?
I have no idea. I mean, it's the Foo Fighters, so it could go. I mean, actually, the Foo Fighters, that first record is pretty good. They get a bad rap for some reason, but I mean, they rock. Like Big Me and what's another song off that first one? I'm trying to remember. Because they do have. Oh yeah, This Is a Call. I'll Stick Around. It's a great album. That might be the best one from them. But I think I probably liked it. I'd like to think.
So tell me about your first experiences with Dark Side of the Moon then. Because I remember from our interview that we did for the artist profiles, you talked about your dad kind of turning off the lights and putting that record on. So let's talk specifically about that record for a second.
Yeah. I just remember he had a really nice stereo system, and it was always an experience. Like, you don't just listen to Dark Side of the Moon. Like, you gotta sit down on the couch, turn the lights off, and immerse yourself in the sound, which is, I mean, clearly he was doing drugs in the 70s when he was listening to it. As a kid, I had no idea. I feel like as a kid, your imagination is so strong that I really could lose myself in it and go into another world listening to Any Color You Like. I remember that song specifically. Just not knowing what any of those instruments were. Like David Gilmour's guitar tone is so insane in that. I mean, now I know it's a wah, but at the time, just all the colors were so inspiring. And also, Grey Gig in the Sky. I mean, there's so many classics on there, and the record itself just sounds so good. It's so natural. There's not a lot of compression on it at all, which is the case for a lot of those 70s records, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I can't say it made me want to be a musician, but it's definitely my first memory of treating music as something more than a passive activity.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting down and really experiencing it, I guess.
Yeah, and it seems like your dad was or is a pretty big rock fan, right? At least for these to be your first two exposures to music generally is Foo Fighters and Pink Floyd.
Yeah, and there's another one too I brought, which I don't know if I mentioned, but this Crosby, Stills and Nash record.
Nice.
Which this is now the cover. This is a rare pressing, I guess, because if you go on streaming now, the photo is all them smiling.
Mm-hmm.
But the original pressing was them being more serious, and they decided that at some point they didn't want to be taken so seriously, so they changed it to a picture of them smiling. But yeah, I remember listening to this too in the car, like the song Cathedral. Graham Nash is just playing piano. It has a crazy build, and it's very haunting. And I remember just asking my dad to replay it, just play that one again, play that one again. Can we listen to that song? I didn't remember what the name of it was. I don't think at the time, but yeah, I just remember driving down like dark roads in Connecticut, listening to that and getting really excited, just like bobbing my head. And now I listen to it, and it's really not that much of a rock song. It's pretty weird, but it's cool. It has like a nice elongated intro, and then I guess a very big drop, for lack of a better term, but the lyrics are all about like him doing acid in a cathedral in Rome, I think. So it's very trippy. And yeah. Sorry, I don't know what the question was. I kind of just went on a tangent there. Got excited about this one.
Well, I wanted to hear about Crosby, Stills, and Nash anyway. Tell me about just your dad's tastes generally, as far as you can remember. Like, were they pretty wide ranging? Because it sounds like it, at least in terms of the rock sphere.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of classic rock, Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, but Southern rock too, Allman Brothers, Marshall Tucker Band, and once in a while he'd put on the classical music or something, or jazz, but mostly classic rock. Like it was, Bob Seger on the radio, and I guess not Bon Jovi, but the world. You go on classic rock radio. That's what we were listening to, and that's what I was exposed to in the beginning. I was really into Led Zeppelin. I remember my mom not letting me listen to it because she said it was like grown-up music. Mm-hmm. My dad being like, "Nah, it's all right. Like, come here, I'll show you it." And we went out and bought the Greatest Hits CD, and I wore that out on my Walkman.
So, did you take anything away? I mean, you mentioned listening to Dark Side of the Moon with your dad was kind of the first time you saw music as more of an active as opposed to a passive experience. Do you think you took anything away long term from how your dad interacted with music? And did it affect at all kind of your listening habits as you grew older, or just how you experience music personally?
It's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, honestly, I don't really listen to music these days. Very rarely. Like, I get in the car and I don't put on the radio. I just drive in silence, which kind of sounds psychopathic when I say it out loud. Like, that's insane. But I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm always mixing or working on records that. Yeah, I don't know. I listen nowadays. I kind of listen to music more as like a treat for myself. Like, I'll put on a vinyl and I'll sit down and listen to a classic album I used to love, and I guess my dad does that too. But he'll always have music on when he's working, which I can't do because I'm a musician, obviously. So that would be a problem. But even if I'm like reading a book or something, I can't focus if there's music on in the background. So yeah, I guess he can be more passive about it, and I'm kind of forced to be active about it because my attention span, or lack thereof.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's very active for you just out of necessity, right? Because you can't, like you said, you just can't have music in the background. So when you do get to put music on, it feels like you have to be more intentional about listening, but also what you're listening to, right? Like, does it ever feel like you can't really listen to everything you want to listen to, or do you feel like you get to your record collection, get through the range of your record collection often enough with kind of the system you have now?
No, I think I kind of am in a cycle of listening to the same records, like most of the ones that we'll probably talk about today. I just go back to them as I get older. I don't really branch out as much, which I would like to do more of because there's a lot of great music, obviously, but being made today as well that I just do not listen to enough. Like, I'm not going to go to the front page of Spotify. I'm just going to go listen to Tonight's the Night or something.
Yeah.
Which is probably not the best for my artistry or something, because it's reconsuming the same stuff. But I don't know. I love it. It's like a warm blanket when I listen to those old records, and I kind of always I use those as my references for my own music too. Mm-hmm. All the records I grew up loving, so it's always good to go back and kind of study in a way. Like, oh yeah, that's what drums are supposed to sound like, you know?
Yeah, and immerse yourself in that atmosphere as well of those records and kind of have them around. Well, I also wanted to ask, has it always, because the through line of all the albums you picked is obviously rock music, but has it always been rock music for you from day one? Like, were there any other genres that were prevalent or just around when you were a kid or through your adolescence?
It was rock music in the beginning, and then I kind of went through a bit of a hip hop phase. I thought I was going to be a hip hop producer, so I got really into Kendrick Lamar and gangster rap. But yeah, I don't know. Hip hop and electronic music was definitely interested in for a while, and that was kind of a detour. And then I went back to rock and folk and guitar based stuff, and I guess I learned basically the hip hop phase taught me production, taught me how to, make a record sound good and record just by playing around in DAWs and Fruity Loops and whatnot. But it's always kind of revolved around acoustic guitar for the most part.
Yeah, and we'll get into later kind of how you came back to rock music, because we talked about that in our interview for the artist profile, and I want to talk about that here. But first I want to ask, what do you think about rock music specifically attracted you from the time you were a child? Even if you kind of drifted away from it later, what do you think that initial attraction or obsession was about?
I mean, I think the energy is part of it, but also I was really into prog rock too when I was younger, like elongated song structures. Yes, and Pink Floyd, obviously, they'll have songs that go through different sections. It could be 20 minutes long sometimes, and it's a real journey. I just thought it was cool. I don't know, the whole era, looking at the pictures of the dudes on the album cover and the sleeve, sitting around in the studio with their instruments. There was just something about it that, I don't know, I was like, that's what I want to do from a young age. And yeah, it kind of just became my whole life, I guess. But the history part of it too is I'm really into history, so when I listen to an artist or I get really into a record, I'm on the Wikipedia. I'm trying to find the classic albums. I'm trying to learn everything about that artist at that time and how the record was made. So it's usually more the records I really love. I love them more than just for the music themselves. A lot of it has to do with the lore behind it. And rock music has a ton of that.
Yeah. And do you think that plays into kind of because we're about to talk about the first two albums you bought, but do you think that plays into your love for having the albums physically, is having the album art there and having sometimes liner notes and things like that?
Yeah. I don't know what I said was the first album I bought. Was it The Band?
Yeah. I can do it. This can be our segue anyway. So the first albums you bought were The Band, by The Band, and then Band of Gypsies, Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, yeah. I have that on vinyl somewhere. I couldn't find it, but yeah, this is the best album of all time. But look at these pictures on the inside. I didn't have the vinyl when I was a kid, but I don't know, I just remember looking at these guys and being like, damn, whatever they're doing, in that cabin, in that barn, there was such a mystique about it. Mm-hmm. Big Pink. This actually wasn't recorded at Big Pink. But I guess maybe that's where a lot of it was written. I forget. Oh, no, this was recorded in Sammy Davis Jr.'s pool house, I think, in Los Angeles. But yeah, I don't know. This is a great example of the lore of the band kind of matching the music perfectly and creating a world you can kind of sink yourself into, like this old Americana Appalachian thing. I mean, they were Canadian, which is insane that, a bunch of Canadians and Levon made the best Southern rock of all time. I mean, they basically invented Americana. But yeah, I just remember buying this when I was a kid on CD and listening to King Harvest over and over again. There was just something so haunting about the lyrics, and I grew up in Connecticut, so all the imagery of the fall just kind of reminded me of like spooky pumpkin patches and ghosts, and these lyrics about like the barn being on fire, and it's just really cool, and really nothing else quite like it out there. Levon's a legend.
And so with Hendrix, you mentioned during our artist profile interview that you learned to play guitar from a book of like Hendrix tabs or something. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So was this your first like encounter with Hendrix is when you bought this album, or was that through your dad?
No, it was through my dad. Actually, it was a Jimi Hendrix blues album. It was called, I think the name of the album was just Blues, and it was a bunch of outtakes he did. And I didn't realize it at the time. And the cover of the album was all these old, it was like a montage of all these old blues guys that he had covered. So I thought that Jimi Hendrix was like some old blues dude from the Delta, from like the 40s or something. I had no idea who he was, and I would listen to the album, and that was just the image of him I had in my mind. And then obviously at some point I started playing guitar and getting more into it, and probably got like Are You Experienced first, my dad put me onto, or Axis Bold as Love, and then I actually saw what he looked like and kind of understood it all more, and just became, I mean, he's the greatest. It's kind of undeniable for guitar players, I think. I mean, his musical vocabulary, he was just so fluid. Like, there was no disconnect between his brain and his fingers and what he wanted to play. And he's also an extremely underrated songwriter. I feel like everyone thinks of him as like the guitar god, which he is, but he also has some amazing ballads. I guess Band of Gypsies was probably one of the later albums I heard by him, but probably my favorite, the most influential, and that's more funk almost influenced. It was him with Buddy Miles and Billy Cox at the Fillmore East over like 4 shows in New Year's 1969, I think. And yeah, I mean, he's ripping across that album. The tones are insane. It's a 3-piece, so it's pretty raw, but there's a song like Machine Gun. There's a moment called The Note among, I guess, guitar players and fans where he sustains this note like 4 minutes in at the beginning of a solo for like 40 seconds. It's insane. And it's swirling around from the Leslie, and it's just so powerful. So I remember trying to emulate all of that on guitar, and they had these tab books by Hal Leonard or something that charted out every single song. I don't know who went through and figured out how to play them all. He's a legend, whoever did that. But yeah, I would just sit down and force myself to get through it, and it was pretty bad at the time, so it probably sounded like shit, but if you're going to try, I feel like if you're going to try to learn something, you might as well go big at the beginning, because it kind of forces you to pick up those skills faster.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that's a pretty difficult, like, I guess that's a pretty steep learning curve to start the instrument there. So what do you think kept you with guitar kind of as you got older, or even through that initial period? Was it that the love for rock that you're talking about, like just the allure of it and being involved in that in some way?
No, I think that kind of faded. That was more when I was really younger, and then I got more into music in kind of like a nerdy way. I got really into Fish. I loved Fish. I still love Fish. I think Trey's one of the greatest guitar players to ever live. And I kind of went from Jimi Hendrix to this electronic phase and back into Fish. And when I got back into Fish, that's really when I just started to enjoy like being in a band. That really, during that period of my life, I started being in my first real bands and jamming live with people and just improvising. And that was pretty motivating in terms of making me want to practice just so I could kind of keep up and get better, you know. And I would just put on Fish jams and basically try to copy what he was doing. And they're like 30 minutes long, so it's perfect length for a practice session.
Yeah. And then you can tell me if you disagree, but I want to return to Band of Gypsies because I wanted to ask you before we move on from it. It feels to me like the allure of it is that it's just it feels like an intimate and raw live performance. You know, like I hadn't heard it in a while, and so when I listened to it again to kind of prepare for this, I was stunned at just how almost clearly you can hear the notes and how he's playing the guitar, right? I think part of it has, like you said, it's a 3-piece, it's pretty raw. I guess my question is, do you agree with that? And do you think that's something that generally appeals to you in music, is that kind of rawness?
100%. Yeah, I think that I'm pretty, it's funny because all my favorite albums are raw, but my biggest struggle I have with my own music is overproducing. Because it's really hard to let something be raw. As you're, you know, you listen to my own voice back, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, get some reverb on that, dude. Like it can be a tough listen. But then I go back and I listen to all my favorite records, and they're literally the rawest things ever. I mean, we're gonna talk about Tonight's the Night soon, probably, and that's the greatest example, I think, of just leaving it all out on the tape in the rawest way possible. I mean, no overdubs, barely any effects, recordings are dry. I think that's something too that's missing from a lot of albums today, probably just because of the technology and the fact that in Logic you can go in and tweak every note to be perfect and add unlimited overdubs, and you don't have to spend money on tape. You don't have to really spend money to be in the studio. There's just too much time. A lot of the old records that I love, they would mix them down in like 15 minutes just because that's all the time they had. They had to get it bounced to tape. I like the Eddie Kramer documentaries where he kind of talks about the process of mixing a lot of those Hendrix albums. I don't know if there's one on Band of Gypsies, but in general, it was like, yeah, go in, get a take, and then do a mix down immediately because you only had however many tracks to work with. So in order to move on with the recording process, you had to like bounce the drums and whatnot and move forward, which, yeah, I think kind of forces it to be raw.
Yeah.
Kind of rambling.
No. I'm trying to figure out if I want to transition to the influential albums now, where we'll talk about Tonight's the Night. I think first, just to kind of keep the chronology going. So you had the period. So you grew up listening to rock. Obviously, you had a period with electronic music and with hip hop, and then you come back to rock and to guitar and to songwriting after that. So tell me about kind of that shift and what drew you back in, because I imagine a lot of these influential albums that you listed are from that era of your life.
Yeah, I kind of just realized that I was better at guitar than electronic music, and I didn't feel like electronic music, there's such a barrier between you and what you're making. Or I guess that's not, it just doesn't, for me, it never felt like it was actually coming from me. Everything is samples and synthesized sounds, and I don't know, it's like I've started playing guitar again, kind of on a whim, and slowly realizing, like, okay, this is actually where I belong musically and where I'm the best. And around that time, I kind of started writing songs for the first time in my life. I was listening to a lot of Bob Dylan, Blood on the Tracks, and then this album, Helplessness Blues, Fleet Foxes, which is, I mean, just insane. Probably one of the best folk albums of all time. I think it'll be remembered that way. I just remember this is another one where I would just put on the headphones and disappear in my bed. I was probably like 19 or 20, and I never heard anything like it. Because I loved Crosby, Stills, Nash and stuff as a kid, but this kind of took it to another level for me. And again, like, I think more so maybe on their first album than this one, but they kind of created a world. Like this medieval, almost choirscape. It was very spooky and influential on me, and also, not the hardest songs in the world to play, which was kind of inspiring. It wasn't overly techy or anything, so it felt doable, and that makes sense. I mean, not that you can write an album like that, but the basic tenets of folk rock. It's like acoustic guitar-based chord songs with overdubs. It's like, okay, I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I heard Fleet Foxes for the first time, I texted a friend who was a few years older, and I said, tell me or give me some music that'll make me feel like I'm in the woods. I don't remember. I was like 17. I don't remember why I wanted to feel like I was in the woods. And she sent back the Fleet Foxes debut, and then I went to Helplessness Blues from there, and it's just such a unique atmosphere, I feel like. It's just such a total... Aesthetic feels like a shallow word for it, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think aesthetic that's accurate, but it's literally like a world that you can get lost in. That's also, I feel like there's a better word for it that we can find at some point, but yeah, it's amazing. And I saw them live, and they were just as good live. I'd love to meet Robin Pecknold one day. He's a huge influence on me, and I know on a lot of my friends who make music.
So, before we get too far, we should probably list out the albums you gave me as the most influential. You have 4 here. If you remember them, there's Fleet Foxes, Helplessness Blues, Neil Young, Tonight's the Night, Nirvana and Utero, and then Ween, Quebec are your 4 albums. I should have flipped them around in my notes because now I'm reading the artist first. But anyway, that doesn't matter. What I want to do is just go through, I mean, we just talked about Fleet Foxes, but go through each of the 4 records and give you a chance to talk specifically about what was influential with those records. Okay,
let's start with Quebec, maybe. It's probably the first Ween album I heard, and maybe the least brown. Which I don't know, are you a Ween fan at all? Have you ever...
I've heard probably 3 of their albums, but... No, I guess I couldn't call myself a fan. Not that I wouldn't call myself a fan, but I feel like I'd be posing if I said yes.
Well, brown basically is what they call, like, what Ween fans call, and what Ween themselves refer to as, like, a shitty sound. Like, the browner the song, kind of the worse it is, but in a lovable way. And so in a very, like, lo-fi or kind of fucked up in some way, whether that's lyrically or, like, effects. And Quebec is probably the least brown album they have. It's pretty, for Ween, it's pretty clean and straightforward. But, yeah, I mean, it's Ween in general kind of showed me that you can be weird and get away with it. Just write, like, you don't, there's no, I think with classic rock and a lot of the albums I'm going to talk about or grew up listening to, they're all kind of serious. Like, there's always even like Fleet Foxes, like most music is serious, which is great. I think it should be, but very rarely do you find an artist who's also kind of putting their humor into it, at least in like the rock genre. It's more common in hip hop and stuff, but for rock, Ween was probably the first time that I really was like laughing at a record, just being like, this is insane. Like, how are they getting away with this? And that was a big influence on me, and kind of just allowed me to, I don't know, indulge in like my weirdest impulses musically, like doing weird stuff with my voice or strange effects, and just kind of being okay with shit sounding fucked up, because I don't know, it's cool sometimes. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the Nirvana record? Or do you want to go to Neil Young next? Because I know that's a huge influence on you as well.
We do Nirvana. Nirvana. I kind of had like a late teenage angst phase. I never liked Nirvana as a kid because I was kind of just judgmental. I was like, oh, that's emo music. Like that's, it's for like, what's the word? I don't know. I just thought it was like emo. I hate my parents kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Was my understanding of it, having never really listened to it. And then when I was like 20, I was at home delivering Chinese food, just working on music. I dropped out of college and just like hated the world, like driving around in the winter in my hometown and just blasting Nirvana and chain smoking cigarettes. And I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. And Nevermind was the first album that really caught my attention, and I probably wore out the most just because the songs are so tight. And I mean, his voice is like crack, dude. It's insane. Like I just can't get enough of it. It's probably my favorite rock voice ever. But In Utero was a little bit rawer, and so I think in terms of my own music, that's probably more influential, especially the drum sounds and stuff. It's very roomy and open. Steve Albini produced it, and he doesn't really... It's all about capturing stuff at the source, which I've tried to do more of with my own work, which is hard because, yeah, you gotta... It's really easy to just, especially when you're producing yourself, I'd always just throw a mic up and don't think about it. And then I listen back a week later, and I'm like, fucking hell, why didn't I just take 10 more seconds to get the source sound right? So I'm kind of constantly trying to remind myself of those techniques in that album specifically, and the whole philosophy behind it, which is, yeah, get the best sound in the room through the microphones, and that will make the rest of the process easier.
Yeah. And, well, do you want to... Yeah, let's go to Neil Young now. I feel like this is the fitting place to go to Neil Young. I was going to move on without talking about Tonight's the Night. So tell me about what role Tonight's the Night had to play in your kind of return to rock music and the start of your songwriting journey.
Tonight's the Night. Here it is. Oh, wait, I haven't even opened this in a while. I didn't know there was a sleeve. Well, this is probably my favorite album of all time. I got into it like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I was never really into Neil Young growing up because my dad... I don't think my dad didn't like his politics or something. So he'd always be like, fucking Neil Young. Like, I like Crosby, Stills. He's more of a Crosby, Stills and Nash guy. And so by default, just doing what my dad does as a young kid, I was like, oh yeah, I guess I don't really like Neil Young either. And then I grew up a little bit. And I forget how I got turned onto it. I really have no idea. Maybe I just stumbled across it, but... The pedal steel, it was the first time I'd really heard pedal steel in rock music with like electric guitars, and it just blew my mind. Like I was like, this is the sound. Because I had kind of been experimenting with pedal steel and stuff before, I was always trying to like straddle two worlds of country and rock, but I don't think I was doing it that well. And then I heard Tonight's the Night, and I was like, that's exactly how it's done. Like that is the blueprint. And it's so raw, dude. Like you can hear Neil slamming into the mic. What they did is they rented out a rehearsal room at SRI Studios for like 2 months. I'm trying to see if there's a picture of it here. I think this was taken in there. And they took a sledgehammer and opened up a hole in the wall and then had a recording truck park outside, and they ran a bunch of mics in, and they would show up every day for 2 months at like 9 o'clock, and they would just play pool and get drunk, and then they would start doing cocaine until like 3 in the morning when they got this glow, is what they describe it as, and some books and stuff, and then they would start recording from like 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. It's absolutely insane. And I mean, that's kind of what the record sounds like when you listen to it. It's super dark, it's super fucked up and lo-fi, but I mean, Salt Lake Albuquerque's probably my favorite song of all time. So haunting. The pedal steel in there is incredible. Ben Keith. But it's kind of got everything. It's got that weirdness that I love about Ween. It's kind of brown. As Ween fans would say, it's got the beauty of the pedal steel. There's also, like, World on a String is pretty rocking, and it's got more ballady stuff too. I mean, yeah, it's just incredible. It's kind of a rough listen. I think Neil said it himself. He's like, you don't put it on at 11 a.m. in the morning. It's like a nighttime album, but I don't know. I listen to it at 11 a.m. in the morning. I don't mind.
And so when you came back to songwriting, or I guess when you started songwriting, you had all these influences swirling around, like through to the time you were 19. Do you feel like the sound of yourself as a songwriter came pretty easily in the wake of that, or was it something you kind of had to carve out and discover that rawness for yourself?
I think I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly. I think it's always evolving, but yeah, early on I was more just kind of just like parroting whatever artist I was listening to at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember going through a big John Prine phase, and I listen back to the songs now from that time, and it just sounds like a dude trying to write a John Prine song, and on with a bunch of different artists. And so I think it took a while for me to kind of shed that. And with Nirvana too, I think the production of Nirvana I was heavily influenced by, maybe a little bit too much in the beginning. I guess now, long story short, it's kind of been an evolving process of just like shedding different skins, I guess. Like it's like I feel like I've tried on a bunch of different sounds and styles and ways of songwriting and production, and it's just been moving on to the next one and just retaining the best parts of each phase until hopefully it kind of sounds like just me.
Yeah.
Which, yeah.
Do you think there was, so on your recent record, Avalanche Hour, do you think there was a skin there, or do you think you've kind of shed that by now? Like where do you
sounds psycho wearing? Whose skin was I wearing? Is that what you're asking?
Not in as specific of terms, but like, do you think there was even an amalgamation of different skins there on that record?
Yeah, I think it was a lot of Nirvana. I mean, actually, I don't know. I mean, actually, I feel like that was, yeah, I guess I need to think about this for a second, but a lot of Queens of the Stone Age, actually, on that one, for sure. I was really into Queens, and then there's Neil Young, too, and the pedal steel. I was trying to just put together, I'm basically trying to do Queens of the Stone Age with pedal steel. But those would probably be the skins I was wearing. It was Queens of the Stone Age and like Ben Keith or something. Something doesn't sound right about wearing the skins. But.
Yeah, we maybe should have found a different metaphor. But to move away from that, I want to talk about your next record a little bit. We don't have to get into like super deep specifics, but do you feel like it will express these influences any differently? And I guess how far along are you in the recording process? Because you said you're working on it.
Yeah, I mean, before you called, I'm going through a different mix. I'm just trying to. I'm in the mastering phase, but going back and making small tweaks. I think it's gonna be. I'm basically trying to strip away as much as I can in terms of production and have it be the rawest possible, like the most like Tonight's the Night or Exile on Main Street, which we didn't talk about much, but that's another one of my favorite albums just because of how raw it is. It's just about the instruments in the room, and when you listen to it, it sounds way more fucked up than you remember it sounding, if that makes sense. Like, I think about a lot of the songs from Exile on Main Street as you just think about the songs, you don't really think about the production, but you go back and listen to the record and you're like, oh, it kind of sounds like shit, but in an awesome way. So I'm kind of trying to take that to heart, and a lot of the new record was recorded in kind of strange circumstances. It probably weren't the best acoustically. So just trying to live with that and let it be part of the song versus changing what's there, and adding samples or whatever. It's a pretty fun record, a little bit lighter. It's not really like Avalanche Hour at all. It's more of just an indie rock record, straight down the line.
Well, and then I feel like this is a good enough segue to go into your chronically underrated classic albums. Honestly, it's not a good segue. This is a pretty sharp transition, but we're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway before we run out of time. So you have self-titled by, is it Warren Zevon?
Yeah, Warren Zevon.
Okay, Warren Zevon, and then Whiskey for the Holy Ghost by Mark Lanagan. So
yeah, just that one right here.
Nice. So just tell me about what you love about these albums and what makes these albums specifically underrated.
Well, I think Warren Zevon and Mark Lanagan are pretty similar in a lot of ways. They're both kind of these like dark figures who write about like the seedy underbelly of society. Like, all their songs are just filled with these kind of strange characters, but there's also a sense of humor. More so with Warren Zevon. He's got a lot of funny songs. Everyone knows Werewolves of London. That's his big hit, but he's one of those artists, kind of like Ween, where he can have a song that will make you laugh and then make you cry on the same album, kind of like John Prine as well. So that first album by him has some of my favorite songs: Desperados, Under the Eaves, The French Inhaler. He just has a wit about his lyrics that I haven't really found in anyone else, and I think he's chronically underrated. More people are kind of discovering him now with the internet, but I don't know, I feel like he never really got his flowers as being one of the greatest of all time. I mean, Bob Dylan thinks so. Bob Dylan covers him, and a bunch of other people. And Mark Lanagan's kind of the same, where very underrated by the mainstream. Kind of flew under the radar for most of his career, but his voice is just ridiculous. It's this low, gravelly kind of warble, and all the songs kind of paint a picture. I think this album he wrote when he was reading Blood Meridian a lot by Cormac McCarthy, which is one of my favorite books. So it's the writing itself is very stark, and the music matches it perfectly. I like a lot of times I'll be listening to it and I can just imagine myself like rolling through some western landscape or something in the 1800s. It's very spacious and it's very sparse too, which is what I love about it. It's very acoustic based, even though he's mostly a rock guy, and the tone of the songs is pretty heavy, and he clearly has like a rock and roll voice, but the instrumentals are beautiful, so it's kind of a nice contrast. Did you listen to this one at all? Did you get a chance?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's pretty weird, but it's cool.
It was I definitely had to perk up because I'm guilty personally of passive listening, right? Especially when I'm researching for something like this. But that was one where I had to go very active on it. Like, it just kind of forced me to perk up my ears a few times.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the best Those are usually the records I don't like in the beginning, probably because I have to actually pay attention to get it. And then I come to realize, like, oh, no, this is great.
Yeah.
But initially, I might just hear it in passing and be like, oh, that's too much for me. Or whatnot. It's laziness.
Yeah. Well, I feel like another one of those, and this is now an actual segue, the album you said that's come out in the past 5 years that you've really enjoyed or that you've loved was Dragon New Warm Mountain by Big Thief. I feel that really is another one of those albums where it kind of forces you to listen very actively, at least in order to get it. Like it's kind of ambient enough at some parts and soft enough that it can be listened to passively, but I feel like it's a very active listening record. But the question I have about the record actually is it's a different vibe from a lot of the other ones you've listed. Like we have a lot of grungier, like more classic rock on here. So just tell me what you love about this record particularly.
I love how airy it is, the production. And again, it kind of feels like you're just in the room with the band. There's a video of Red Moon when they're recording it on YouTube that actually shows them recording the take that ended up on the album. And they're all crowded into a room that's probably this big, drummer and everything, just recording it with a very basic mic setup. And I mean, that's kind of as raw as it gets. I think just 5 people in a room. I think he's playing fiddle in that video too. The whole album in general is just so eclectic as well. Like there's moments when Adrian's doing almost like math rocky electric guitar parts, but then the next song is like this country ballad, like Blue Lightning or something, which is I just know. I think she's probably the greatest living songwriter at the moment, and that band is just insane. When that album came out, it kind of threw me for a loop. I was obsessed with it. I listened to it so much, and I also love a good double album. The White Album, Exile on Main Street. I just love the space. I love how weird bands get on double albums. Wilco's Being There is another one of those where it just gets so far out there and covers so much ground, but still while sounding like that band. And I feel like that's, I don't know, probably what I want to strive for the most is covering all that ground while still sounding like yourself. And I think that's the biggest challenge. But yeah, when bands pull it off, it's my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah. And then I think this will be my last question, honestly, but as I mentioned, a lot of the albums you pulled for this podcast were classic rock albums, you know, grungier, rawer, more like rough around the edges than that Big Thief record. Not that the Big Thief record isn't rough around the edges, but it's different, you know. And so I'm curious, like, where, if anywhere, do you see rock as a genre particularly going in the modern era, like in this decade? Not that it has to be a monolith, but do you see any trends or anything like that that sort of interest you or things that perk up your ear as someone who primarily listens to classic rock?
I think it's going in the direction I would want it to go in, which is more raw, you know. There's a lot of artists like MJ Lenderman and Waxahachie, other bands too, like Hotline TNT is pretty cool. I'm trying to think. There's so many great underground indie bands right now that are super lo-fi. I mean, I guess lo-fi is a term now that's thrown around, which is basically what we're talking about with the rawness. But actually, I don't know if that's true. Lo-fi to me is when you like run through something through a tape machine and crunch the shit out of it. Mm-hmm. Whereas the rawness factor of like Tonight's the Night is capturing the performance. But I do think that in general, the younger generation of musicians is kind of going in that direction because they're rebelling against AI. Like I see on TikTok and, you know, all the apps, people throwing jam sessions and kids being in bands again, which I feel like wasn't really a thing for the past 10 years. And I think it's a direct reaction to how everything is so saturated and formulaic, and people are using Suno and shit. And I don't know, the younger generation, they've been on their phones their whole lives and they're kind of tired of it. That's what I would like to think. So I think there's going to be a real resurgence of actual bands playing in a room together and, not producing themselves to death or using samples. I mean, that's what I want to see. Maybe I'm just being a little optimistic, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's going that way.
Thank you again for tapping into this episode of The Spin. If you enjoyed this episode and this conversation, please check out our website at melt-fm.com to see some of our interviews with rising artists from across the globe and some of the additional content we'll be pushing out over the coming months. Thank you.